Well, it is exactly 1 year now since the Occupy Wall Street movement kicked off in New York's Zuccotti Park, protesting against corporate greed. It's spread across the US and abroad, despite a traditionally heavy-handed response from police. And now the occupiers want to regain new momentum with mass rallies on the anniversary of their movement. RT's Marina Portnaya is at the epicenter in New York, joins us now live. Good to see you again. Have the anniversary rallies already started? I spoke to you an hour ago. It certainly seemed that the riot police were certainly there.
That's right, Rory. And you mentioned Zuccotti Park when introducing the story. I'm actually standing in Zuccotti Park right now. This is where the Occupy Wall Street movement began just a year ago, with hundreds of activists camped out here, waging a fight against economic inequality, corporate influence on U.S. politics. And we saw that over a matter of weeks, thousands of Americans in New York City and throughout the country joined this movement. Now it's been a year, and hundreds of activists and their supporters are downtown in Lower Manhattan, holding rallies throughout this part of the city, Wall Street, as it is known. But what kind of effect will this day of demonstrations have on the U.S. political system and the U.S. presidential election? Now, to talk about that, I am joined by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, author, and activist Chris Hedges. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So what kind of effect do you think this resurgence or celebration of the Occupy movement will actually have on the U.S. system?
Profound. I think the Occupy movement was a seismic shift, not only in terms of the discourse, but in terms of identifying the centers of power and how to respond to them. I think we have to look at Occupy as a tactic, in the same way that the freedom rides in the civil rights movement were a tactic. It is always the ruling class that determines the parameters of resistance or revolt. And because the ruling class has responded exclusively in the language of force by trying to eradicate or erase these encampments, rather than respond rationally, as the New York Times columnist Paul Krugman constantly talks about, rationally would mean addressing the grievances and injustices that pushed people into these encampments and it brought people out into the streets today. And they're not going away. Indeed, things are getting worse. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have lost their unemployment benefits. There's been no attempt by the ruling elite to address the chronic underemployment and unemployment, student debt, which is breaking the backs of college graduates who cannot get jobs, or certainly jobs where they can sustain themselves, a healthcare system that is imploding. This political paralysis is very dangerous because it inevitably means a backlash. And in America, the backlash could be a right-wing backlash as well. We're not guaranteed that it will remain nonviolent or that it will remain inclusive in a way that the Occupy movement has been.
And speaking of the ruling elite, the U.S. presidential election is in 7 weeks. According to recent reports, at least $164 million has been spent by Wall Street donating to these political presidential campaigns. This is exactly what the movement is fighting against, the financial industry having such an influence over U.S. politics. What kind of influence do you think this movement can have in this window of time, 7 weeks? Could it really make a change?
In this window of time, it may make a significant change. I think over the long term, it will, especially as conditions deteriorate for the average American, the working class, and increasingly the middle class. What we have cemented into place is a system of legalized bribery. Public elected officials are, in essence, corporate employees. The judiciary is largely, not completely, having just sued the president and won, a wholly owned subsidiary of the corporate state. And I think that the flagrant sort of corruption, the ability of this small, rapacious class of corporate oligarchs to write the laws, write the legislation, create a two-tiered system where there are one set of rules for us and another set of rules for them. This ultimately is going to implode. When, how long it will take, I've covered movements around the world as a foreign correspondent for the New York Times. You can't tell. They're a mysterious force. But the fact that the ruling elite has chosen not to respond at all, or at least to respond exclusively in the language of force, means that this story is far from over.
And the response here in New York has been a heavy-handed one. I mean, as we're talking right now, I hear helicopters circling
Right.
overhead. There are hundreds of police officers
Right.
down here, lots of them dressed in riot gear. Zuccotti Park is empty, but as
Right.
far as I know, activists are demonstrating throughout Lower Manhattan. What is the
Yeah.
plan for today?
Well, the plan was to, rather than gather in one large group, gather in a series of small groups and attempt to march on Wall Street. Yeah, I mean, look, the ruling elite is nervous, and I've been here since 6 this morning, and you saw all these bankers, when it came time for work, coming out of the subways, and none were dressed in suits, because they were scared. They were scared to walk through the crowd and be identified as part of that speculative class, which is not only trashed the American economy, trashed the global economy, looted the U.S. Treasury, and essentially is a parasitic force. So, look, you know, the 1765 Stamp Act rebellion was the precursor to 1776. The 1905 rebellion in Russia was the precursor to 1917. It takes that long. But what we have unleashed, or what Occupy unleashed a year ago, I believe, ultimately spells the end of the corporate state.
Right. And we're going to have to leave it right there. Chris Hedges, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it. And for our viewers, we will be down here all day covering this Occupy movement as events unfold. So stay tuned to RT, and we will be here in the next hour bringing you the latest.